The blinding lights of the truck were the last thing I remembered from my life in Tokyo. My hands were much smaller and softer than they should have been. I stood up and noticed the shimmering silver hair falling over my shoulders. A translucent interface floated in the air before me, displaying my new stats. It seemed I had been reborn into the world of Phi with a specialized affinity for water. The air in the forest of Rondo felt thick with mana and the scent of pine. I decided that my first priority was to survive and master these new abilities. I reached toward the stream and felt a strange pull deep within my chest. A massive column of water erupted from the surface at my silent command. My mana pool was far larger than any standard starter character. For the next 3 years, the Forest of Rondo became my personal training ground. I practiced condensing water until it became as hard as steel. A wild forest boar charged at me with tusks bared. I snapped my fingers and turned the moisture in the air into jagged ice needles. The creature fell instantly, frozen solid before it could even squeal. I spent my nights reading ancient scrolls I found in a hidden cavern. One scroll mentioned the Water Sovereign, a title given to those who could control all states of matter. I began experimenting with steam, heating the water particles until they became an invisible scalding mist. By the second year, I could create a perfect replica of myself made entirely of liquid. Even the most dangerous monsters in the forest started to avoid my territory. Despite my growth, I began to crave the sound of a human voice. I needed to test my skills against the world outside these trees. I practiced my swordplay using a blade I forged from deep-sea ice. The blade never melted, even in the heat of a magical fire. A sudden scream echoed through the northern part of the forest. It wasn't the sound of an animal, it was definitely human. I found a group of travelers cornered by a pack of dire wolves. Without thinking, I leaped from the cliff and summoned a whirlpool in the center of the clearing. The wolves were swept away by the sudden torrential force. I dismissed the magic, leaving the ground dry in an instant. The travelers looked at me as if I were a forest spirit. I didn't stay for their thanks and vanished back into the shadows. Interacting with them made me realize my training here was finished. I had attained a level of power that the forest could no longer challenge.
Tomorrow, I would leave the Forest of Rondo for good.
I took a final look at the small home I had built for myself. My stats had evolved, and a new skill had appeared in my menu. It was labeled as the Sovereign's Curse, and I didn't know what it meant. Just as I prepared to sleep, a low, unnatural vibration shook the ground. I looked out the window and saw a dark rift opening in the center of my training clearing. Something massive and ancient began to crawl its way out of the void. I gripped my ice sword, realizing my departure might be more explosive than I planned. A voice whispered in my mind, telling me that the Sovereign had finally been found. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and the air around me began to freeze uncontrollably. If I survived this night, the world would never be the same. I stood on the jagged cliffs of the Rondo coast as the storm finally began to break. A splintered hull of a merchant vessel bobbed violently amidst the receding whitecaps. I spotted a single hand clinging desperately to a floating crate in the distance. Without a moment of hesitation, I leaped from the precipice and manipulated the moisture in the air to cushion my fall. I landed on the surface of the water, freezing a solid platform of ice beneath my boots instantly. The drowning man's strength was clearly fading as another wave crashed over his head. I extended my palm, commanding a gentle current to lift the man from the freezing depths. He coughed up salt water and gasped for air as I pulled him onto my icy raft. The man introduced himself as Abel, an adventurer who had been caught in the sudden magical tempest. He looked at my youthful appearance and the ice beneath us with a mixture of awe and suspicion. I used a faint heat spell to dry his clothes and prevent the onset of hypothermia. After bringing him safely to the shore, I realized that my period of isolation had come to a necessary end. I decided to follow Abel's advice and head toward the bustling trade city of Lawn to register my skills. The path out of the forest was overgrown and teemed with monsters that had evolved in the high mana environment. A sharp screech echoed through the trees as a shadow passed quickly over the sun. A pair of emerald wyverns descended from the peaks, their scales shimmering with poisonous mana. I didn't even draw my sword, choosing instead to test my mid-range water compression techniques. I fired a series of high-velocity water needles that pierced through the wyvern's wings like bullets. The creatures crashed into the underbrush, neutralized before they could even land a strike. I wondered if the world outside was truly this fragile compared to my training sessions. As I reached the rocky pass leading to the plains, the ground began to tremble rhythmically. A massive earth golem, composed of jagged granite and moss, rose from the canyon floor. The golem let out a low, grinding roar and swung a fist the size of a carriage at me. Water magic was less effective against solid stone, so I decided to use a phase change strategy. I saturated the golem's joints with mist, and then instantly expanded it into jagged ice from the inside. The internal pressure caused the massive construct to shatter into thousands of harmless pebbles. Fighting these automated guardians was becoming a tedious chore on my journey. From the top of the final ridge, the sprawling city of Lon finally appeared on the horizon. Its white stone walls and towering spires reflected the orange glow of the setting sun. I donned a simple hooded cloak to hide my distinctive silver hair before approaching the gates. The guards at the entrance stopped me, demanding to see identification or a travel permit. I explained that I was a traveling mage seeking to register with the local guild. One guard whispered to another about the strange mana signature he felt radiating from me. They eventually let me pass, but I could feel their eyes following me into the crowded streets. The city was a sensory overload of shouting merchants, aromatic street food, and clanging blacksmiths. I navigated the maze of alleys until I found the imposing building marked with the Adventurers Guild crest. Entering the guild hall, I was greeted by the smell of old parchment and the sound of boisterous drinking. A woman behind the counter looked up from her ledger, her eyes narrowing as she assessed my age. I placed my hand on the registration crystal, prepared to reveal just enough power to be accepted. The crystal didn't just glow, it hummed with a resonance that caused the nearby windows to rattle. The entire room went silent as the seasoned adventurers turned their heads toward the source of the vibration. I realized I might have overestimated the average mana capacity of this world's residents. A tall man in heavy plate armor approached me, his hand resting on the hilt of a massive broadsword. He demanded to know where a kid like me had obtained such an unnatural amount of magical energy. I prepared a defensive spell in my mind, sensing that a peaceful registration was no longer an option. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the guild's front doors, and a frantic messenger burst inside. He screamed that a high-ranking Akuma had bypassed the city's outer defenses and was heading for the square. From outside, a demonic roar echoed through the streets, chilling the blood of everyone in the room. The armored man forgotten, I turned toward the exit, realizing my first day in Lon was about to become a bloodbath. As I stepped into the street, I saw a creature of pure shadow towering over the fountain, and its eyes locked onto mine. The towering shadow creature by the fountain let out a low guttural growl as its violet eyes locked onto my position. I tightened my grip on my staff, feeling the familiar hum of the water mana coursing through my veins. Without warning, the Akuma lunged forward with speed that defied its massive, bulky frame. I exhaled slowly and conjured a massive wall of pressurized water to intercept the demon's strike. The impact of its claws against my shield created a deafening spray of mist and steam that obscured the entire square. Taking advantage of the cover, I transformed the liquid wall into hundreds of razor-sharp ice needles. I commanded the ice to fly forward, piercing through the Akuma's shadowy hide with surgical precision. With a final agonizing shriek, the creature dissolved into a pile of black ash that scattered in the wind. I realized then that the town of Lon was no longer safe for someone trying to hide their identity. The next morning, I walked through the grand arches of the Adventurers Guild to finalize my registration. The interior was a chaotic symphony of clanking armor, loud laughter, and the smell of roasted meat. I approached the reception desk where a sharp-eyed woman waited with a stack of parchment. She looked at my small frame and silver hair with an expression of pure disbelief. I placed my hand on the magical measurement orb, letting just a fraction of my power leak out. The orb cracked under the pressure of my mana, causing the entire room to fall into a dead silence. I quickly withdrew my hand, hoping I hadn't caused too much trouble on my first day. Despite the mishap, I was handed a polished copper plate that officially marked my rank as an adventurer. Weeks passed by as I took on simple quests, slowly building a reputation in the port city of Whitnash. Soon, the city prepared for the legendary Whitnash Port Festival, celebrating the bounty of the sea. The harbor was filled with ships decorated in silk ribbons, their masts gleaming under the coastal sun. I noticed a group of cloaked figures moving through the crowd with an unnatural, synchronized grace. Their eyes were not on the festivities, but fixed squarely on the royal viewing platform above. I spotted a young princess waving to the citizens, completely unaware of the crossbows being leveled at her. I sprinted toward the nearest building, jumping from the ground to the rooftop in a single mana-enhanced leap. Just as the first bolt was fired, I conjured a localized rainstorm to knock the projectiles out of the sky. The crowd began to scream and scatter as the assassins drew their hidden blades. I wouldn't let them ruin this peaceful day, especially not on my watch. I manipulated the moisture in the air to bind the assassins' feet to the cobblestone ground. One of the attackers threw a smoke bomb, filling the area with a thick, choking gray cloud. I simply clapped my hands, creating a gust of wind that blew the smoke out into the sea. I descended from the roof, landing gently in front of the lead assassin who was struggling to break free. He looked at my youthful face and laughed, unaware that I held the power of a sovereign. With a flick of my wrist, I summoned a tidal wave from the harbor that towered over the city walls. I didn't drown them, but instead used the water to form cages that trapped every single traitor in an instant. The royal guards finally arrived, their armor clanking as they surrounded the captured criminals. The princess herself walked down from the platform, looking at me with eyes full of wonder and gratitude. I bowed low, not wanting any special treatment, and prepared to slip away into the crowd. As the sun began to set over the ocean, the festival music started up again, louder and more joyful than before. I realized that while I sought peace, my strength would always be a shield for those who couldn't protect themselves. With the threat resolved and my new life truly beginning, I walked toward the horizon, ready for whatever the world of Fi had in store.